Hello and welcome to a slightly different version of an update on the Aries North Node, where we are going to look at an example, a real life example of an Aries North Node, Warren Buffett, and have a look at his chart, do some chatting about like his philosophy and kind of like what he's known for. I love documentaries. The Aries North Node is all about finding like what brings you to life, like you personally, and that does not have to be externally validated or supported at all for you to get to have exactly what you want. And so, like, if I'm like over here designing my perfect life, I'm getting to live and to exist and like survive, make money, or be supported based on getting to take in mind candy documentaries and other like fun, thoughtful, contemplative things that make me think, and then getting to come on and talk about them. Like, that is just the ideal situation. And this morning I was moved to rewatch, I'm pretty sure I've watched this before. If not, I watched a different Warren Buffett documentary that had a lot of the same stuff in it. But I'm rewatching this documentary. I linked it in the description. I will say there are patches of audio like dropped out of the documentary because I think it's an HBO documentary, and the fact that it's even on YouTube is probably wrong. So I'm guessing they're flying under the radar by like not having the full audio, so that hopefully it like won't get flagged as like a copyright or like a copy of something else that does exist. And so anyways, that is actually a really fun intro to one of the things that Warren Buffett is really known for, is his philosophy about how to like play the game. He's very competitive. He's like also very like internally trusting his own instincts. He's internally trusting his own ability to like reason and identify. He had mentors along the way, and he talks about that in the documentary. But ultimately, like, he's a very like trust yourself, know what you're doing, and that's enough. Like, again, nobody else has to validate or back you up that you're doing the right thing. And that's one of the things that he's like essentially a trendsetter. Like in the documentary, they if you can hear the background noise, I apologize. In the documentary, they talked about how he was the first person, I think they might have said he's the only person who currently exists who has ever built from scratch a company that's in like the top 10 of the Fortune 500, like biggest, most like successful by 3D material standards, like the game of money. He is one of the most successful players of it alive at this point. He built Berkshire Hathaway from nothing. And the story of how he did that is a really funny contemplation between the difference between instinctual action, right? Waiting for, he calls it like waiting for the pitch that's right in your sweet spot. And as what he does is he just watches like all of these different pitches, like thousands of pitches fly by him, and he doesn't swing. And then one comes that's in his sweet spot and he swings, and that's the one. He calls it, I think they call it value investing. And so anyways, that's his philosophy. And he's used that kind of like very reserved and yet instinctual, like waiting for the pitch that's in his sweet spot, and how that compares to impulsiveness. Because impulsiveness and instinctual, like those have two very different emotional connotations. Like in my body, they feel like very different concepts. Instinctual has what I would call a positive connotation, like we are happy about being instinctual, we're appreciating that. Impulsive almost always comes with a negative connotation where it caused harm. It was like impulsiveness was like following the impulse and you shouldn't have kind of thing. Like it's an error to be impulsive. Again, this is just the connotation, and that's just the culture of like kind of what exists out here, very Libra South Node, like what's in the static of our culture that could possibly be soaked up in our body as far as seeing instinctual as better than impulsive. But what I want to pull out of that documentary is a story about how Berkshire Hathaway even started. And he is known for being this like almost very risk averse, and yet when it's in his sweet spot, he'll make a huge risk. He'll make a huge bet, put a lot of his chips on the table when it's the pitch in the sweet spot. So in my mind, that's far more instinctual as far as his strategy to playing the game. But with Berkshire, and I'm not going to like recount the entire story, but essentially it boiled down to he was supposed to buy, or he, like the management of the company wanted him to sell his position. And he said like, well, I mean, when the stock appreciates to a certain point, then we'll liquidate our position and whatever. And he's like, okay, so how much do you want? And it was supposed to be like $11.50 a share or something like that, $11.50. And the buy order, a couple months later, the buy order came in and like, we want to buy your shares. And the price that was listed on there was 11 3/8. And so it was like 11 4/8 would have been $11.50. 11 3/8 is them trying to, in his words, like swindle or like double cross him out of the eighth, right? Like they're trying to save themselves like 12 cents or some shit, like 12 and a half cents, I think is what an eighth is. But like trying to save themselves 12 and a half cents per share, they're offering like, yeah, but we get to, you know, save this 12 and a half cents. It made him so mad, that what he did instead was went out and bought more stock and eventually became the majority shareholder. And that meant that like as the majority shareholder, like he owns the company and is now making decisions as far as like what is going on in that company. So he removed the management that had double crossed him and installed new management, and that was Berkshire Hathaway. That was like the beginning of his, you know, like all of the different companies that he's ever partnered with and basically bankrolled. Like he has a very independent business management style where he conveys, don't do anything that would reflect back and hurt the reputation of Berkshire Hathaway, because that reputation that's our real asset. So as long as you're not doing anything that would damage the true asset of what we're all depending on, like all of these different companies, the company is expected to operate like completely independent from him, even though he owns it. He puts these managers in there, and then just like every year to 18 months, he'll like write them a letter. Like that's it. Like he's the opposite of a micromanager. And again, I feel like all of this is really helping to paint the picture of like just a really successful Aries North Node expression as far as, you know, taking risks and knowing how to play the game of life. And it's wanting me to recommend another book called Busting Loose from the Money Game by Robert Scheinfeld. And that probably means it's time for me to listen to it again, because I've listened to it many times and it is so empowering, absolutely so empowering. But anyways, that's one thing that Warren Buffett, like he claims as far as what he knows how to do in this money game. He's like, he knows how compound interest works. He has this quote that he heard from someone that said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. That like basically it's just the idea that if you have money, it'll just make more money. Like the more money you have, the more money it's making for you, and like it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Like that old fable also mentioned in the documentary about the like humble farmer who goes to the king and does him this big favor, and the king's like, okay, so how can I repay you? How can I, repay your kindness? And he's like, well, let's take a chessboard, and on the first square we can put 1 grain of, or like 1 kernel of wheat, and on the second we'll double it and we'll put 2, and on the third we'll double it and we'll put 4, and we'll just keep going until all of the squares on the chessboard are covered. And the king's like, great, let's sign me up, that's wonderful. And if you do that, by the time you get to doubling on the 64th, I think, square on the board, is a lot, and at giving away the kingdom, as he put it. And so, yeah, there's like a kind of like I was talking about with Ananda in the heart to heart that we just did. It's like there's what's real, there's what is, and the Aries North Node person, from that Libra South Node vantage point of like lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes of observing other people playing the game, right? That's like what you're doing as a Libra South Node when you're like perpetually looking at the other. You're in observation mode, and we think back to like previous lifetimes as far as like, why was that? Well, like you were learning, you were studying, you were becoming a better player of the game. You were taking notes on what works and what doesn't work, as far as when somebody has power, like, what do you do with it? Because being born in a physical body, you're signing up to hold power. And so then what do you do with it? Like, how do you be a human in the world? How to do life? Like, I was thinking too, this is more Sagittarius, but I do have like late degree Sagittarius placements. So this late degree Aries North Node that we have right now is like making a perfect trine to my Saturn, my Uranus, and my Earth across from my Sun. So there's like this concept of making meaning. Meaning doesn't just happen. It's something that we make. It's the way we understand the world and the way we understand ourselves in relation to the world. And that Libra South Node is far more geared towards observing the way everybody else is playing the game. And like that Libra air, the scales of justice being the symbol of this sign, where that's an object, that's not even a human, like it's not even alive, it's just a weighing the balance of like what is, what are you doing and what are you doing, and how do those weigh against each other? There's no you in any of that. And so defining who you are and what you stand for and how you want to play the game, and what is your philosophy? What is the meaning of your life? Let's take a look at Whorton's chart. So let's see, what are the things that really jump out as far as supporting that Aries North Node journey, supporting the development of his individual identity, supporting the healing of the Libra North Node tendencies. Let's have a look at what do we find in the chart. And Babo wants to help. You want to help us, Babo? You got to come here. You got to be good. No playing with this one, please. Oh, he's a wilding. And I'm pretty sure it is a he. We're still, only about 99% sure of that fact. So, no, baby. That's too much. Gotten really comfortable. So the first thing that I want to say about Whorton's chart is, number one, he has his Uranus and his IC also in Aries. And this is incredibly relevant. And I would ask an Aries North Node, what else energy do you have in Aries? Where is it located in your chart? Because that's going to tell us a lot about how nurtured is your Aries North Node path in this life. And that can tell us something as far as like, is this a lifetime where you are here to really step full force into your North Node? Or is it kind of a pause and reflect lifetime on the critical inner workings of your South Node? And I say that because when we come in, we are our South Node without, without any progress forward from that point, like the development happening, we are our South Node until we consciously wake up and are like, I want a different way. I want to try this differently. And that happens at different stages for everyone. Like there's people in my comments sometimes on Owning Authenticity that are like, I'm in my 70s or my 80s and I'm just now finding the spiritual path. And I'm like, that's no problem. Like everybody's path is happening at the right time. And I will say, Whorton, I believe wholeheartedly that this is a lifetime where he fully intended to step full force into his Aries North Node. It's very supported that he lean in that direction. And the first two things are his Uranus placement being there and his IC. The IC, like the beginning of our fourth house, that is incredibly telling as far as like, what is the root energy of your being? Like when you withdraw into your shell of like your inner being, the part of you that maybe you don't even know, but for sure nobody else knows. What energy is at that root? And that tells you something about kind of like how to stand straight in this world, how to like find your own, I want to say like a line of gravity, like your center of gravity in this world, like to be able to stand upright. The root energy, your IC energy, is incredibly important to focus on. Are you in the shadow or are you in the light? And the fact that his North Node is in his IC energy and his Uranus being our divine individuality, the individual you that you were born to be, that like by you chasing your own individual desires, the good of the all is served, period. Like that's not always the case for all energies, right? Like there are other energies that want different things from us, but Uranus is the promise that says your desires are good. Your desires are serving the good of the all, and we don't have to understand what that is in order to be serving the good of the all by following our desires. Basically in the documentary, Whorton tells about his dad, how his dad was really good at that, as far as you know why you're doing something, and if you have your reasons and you think it's right, then that's all you need. And other people understanding or supporting you or cheering you on, like you don't need that. You need to know that you believe in what you're doing. And so to grow up with a parent who has that as their philosophy, like I feel like that is very telling as far as the IC being in Aries. Well, really any of it, all of his Aries energy, it's like that makes so much sense on the cusp of his fourth house, being encouraged and nurtured and rooted in individuality. Like that's where his roots go, is back to the philosophy of his dad. And the philosophy of his dad is like, you be you, and you know what you're doing on the inside, and that's all you need. And so those roots, like that just feels very Aries IC. His Uranus being in Aries, that is going to be its own timeline of individuation as well. So like it takes 42 years to get to our Uranus opposition. So at 42, we have Uranus transiting the sign that's opposite from where our natal Uranus is in our natal chart. So for him, it's Uranus in Aries. So it took 42 years for Uranus to get to Libra after he was born. And that's a really interesting timeline if you watch the documentary and how his sexuality unfolded as he got older. Him and his wife had a very interesting marriage as far as the structure of their relationship. I don't believe they ever got divorced. I could be wrong about that fact, but they did eventually separate and live completely independent lives where they each had other romantic partners. And I believe when the wife passed away, he married the woman that he was with, and had been with basically since he stopped being with his wife. But from what it sounded like, it was like very open and honest and not deceptive, just very clearly knowing that, you know, this is what I want. And I believe his wife was even in on, she would be great for you. She is like so exactly who you need. And I believe that's how that relationship got going as far as Whorton taking notice of that person. But again, watch the documentary. I could be a little bit off on the exact facts of what happened here. But as far as like other indicators for why I believe his Aries North Node was so supported, the next one that jumps out at me is Saturn in the first house. So the first house being associated with Aries energy, and the first house being associated with our identity, our approach to the world. Like when we step out into the world, how is it that we want to be? How do we want to swing? Do we want to swing at every single thing that comes by us? Or do you only want to swing when it's right in your sweet spot? Like, what is your strategy as far as how you're going to be on the planet? And so to have Saturn in your first, Saturn representing like the brick by brick by brick by brick by brick, day by day by day by day. And that's his whole philosophy is compound interest. Compound interest requires time. Compound interest, in order to get excited about this penny is going to make me this 1/100th of a penny. In order to get excited about that, you have to let that scenario play out over decades. And he has. Right? Like he's been doing his Berkshire Hathaway thing for like half a century, maybe longer. And again, it's like the only built from scratch company in the top 10 Fortune 500. Like, I feel like that's one takeaway of like this Aries North Node is like, depending on how fully you intended to step into that in this lifetime, how much, you know, headwinds are you having at your back versus like having pushing against you back into your Libra South Node. Depending on those intentions, I can see that like there's this huge potential to basically go down in history books as the only person who ever fill in the blank of like whatever really lights your soul on fire. Like he explains numbers, like he just loved numbers, like from a little bitty baby age, he loved numbers, he loved reading. So like that just kind of became his language, the way he liked to look at the world was through numbers. And that eventually like led into, you know, who he is today. And so what truly lights your soul on fire, and then making history as the only person who ever accomplished XYZ, or the first person to ever prove that XYZ was possible. Like there's this leading edge of experience and demonstrating the raw, authentic spark of humanity. Like when you point your life force energy at something over a long enough, you know, arc of time, what is possible? He's such a role model for this. And that Saturn in the first, Saturn in Capricorn, I think is especially interesting because he has a 10th house South Node. So like 10th house being associated with Capricorn, 10th house South Node being like, he already has experience building things in the physical. He has done that many times. He knows how to like put the pieces together to make a foundation and then, you know, erect walls and put on a roof and put on a second story and a third story. He knows how to build things. That Capricorn associated 10th house, the 10th house South Node that he has. So to have that level of expertise of the 10th house South Node and to have his Saturn in Capricorn. Saturn is a very interesting planet to me because, again, it's like, what are you here to build? And it's about daily effort, and that is equal across the board. So like every single person has some daily effort that they're here to, like, today I'm going to put this brick and I'm going to do whatever I need to, like, you know, shore up this brick, and I'm going to do this. And like, okay, so then tomorrow morning when I wake up, this brick is already there. And then I'm going to take this next brick and I'm going to put it on top, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to like get this brick and get it. And then when I wake up the next day, both of these bricks are already there. And if you just keep doing that, so like that is Saturn. It's the realness of the real. Like, reality is, if you take a step forward today, tomorrow you are starting from another step forward. And if you keep doing that, it will add up. And so that is the raw energy that is equal across the board. The thing about Saturn is that not all Saturns are building the same thing. Every single one of us came here to lay different bricks. Every single one of us came to point our unique life force energy at something different. And for him personally, with Saturn in the first house and having an Aries North Node, it's like both of those things are pulling him in this direction of individualizing his approach to life. So let's say, for example, he had the exact same chart of like Aries North Node in the 4th house, that 10th house South Node, and he had Saturn in the 7th. Okay, so like that's the only thing that would change, is Saturn in the 7th. At that point, that would be an example of something where I would look at that and I would say, you had more intentions of really studying what is going on that Libra South Node end. You weren't really wholeheartedly every sign pointing to the North Node side. Like in this, that's just one more sign, like one more energy really pushing him towards his North Node. But if that Saturn was in the 7th, it would be pushing towards the South Node. In this case, because it's in Libra. So, and Libra is commonly associated with the 7th house. So like that's one example of, he has multiple pieces that are encouraging his individuation. And that's where I go to his Libra midheaven, his Libra Venus, which would be, Venus would be the ruler of his Libra South Node. So like any of you that are Aries North Nodes, check out where your Venus is. You know, like that Venus, ruler of the South Node, is conjunct with his South Node. And that to me is like this ease in the South Node of like, there's no fight against it. There's almost like a loving acceptance of what it is. That's my best understanding for right now. I'm gonna like, you know, wrap that in a, let's come back to that later kind of paper, because I keep attracting Venus conjunct South Node people. Venus being my ruling planet since I'm a Taurus rising. And so to attract Venus conjunct South Node people over and over and get to really spend time with them, there's this quality of love that really shines through in their being. And it does seem that they do have like, not necessarily like a push towards the North Node, but like that there's not a lot of wasted energy on the South Node side fighting against being that. Like, I feel like me personally, I have the ruler of my South Node squaring my South Node. It's like South Node in Virgo, so my Mercury is squaring my South Node. And I feel like I've had so much energy wrapped up in like trying not to be what I am. Like just leaning away from who I am and trying to leave it behind, like cutting it off just so it just doesn't exist. And that like doesn't work. Like you have to come fully into who you are before you can like evolve into whatever's coming next. And so that Venus conjunct South Node in the 10th house, I feel like really elevates his profile, the 10th house part, elevates his profile to this international place where he is a role model for millions, if not, eventually billions of people. He's made a really huge impact, and it's from this Libran place of justice and humanity and equality. And they do spend a good chunk of time in the documentary talking about his wife's interest in civil rights and how she just was so passionate about equality and how wrong it was to have inequality. And she was very mobilized by this passion. And Warren Buffett, would go with her to hear different speeches, and they sat together and listened to Martin Luther King give his speech. And it just, like, that's like a really beautiful example of him really embracing who he was. Like, there was no fight at all. There was just like, this is common sense that there be equality. And I think, again, like that Libra, South Node, Venus, Midheaven, and Mercury, like, he's got this, yes, he's here to be an individual, and he is here to find his own individual path of what works for him. But so much of the reason he's here is for his Libran superpowers. And they're like on display. And the more he anchors into his Uranus, IC, North Node in the 4th house, which he's lived in the same house for 50 some years in Omaha, Nebraska, because he likes it there. Like, he's such a recluse. So to have that root, and the more he roots down into his individuality, it's like the brighter his star shines. So all of that, like, really pointing towards, this concept, this Uranian concept of your deepest desires, your raw individuality does serve the good of the all. Like, you becoming who you meant to be, who you were born to be, does serve the good of the all. Another piece that I see is his Sagittarius moon in the 11th house. So that moon being in the 11th house of kind of like our hopes and dreams, and the people that will encourage us to be our most individual self. And that moon, he talks about a lot of different people that he met who were influences on him. Like, he can kind of tell you, like, who were the influences that helped to shape who you are. We don't become our individual self in a vacuum. And he talked about in the documentary his dad, and how his dad was like I forget, I think it was like politically, not religiously, but he was a true believer. He was like all in, this is his whole philosophy. And as Warren grew up, and really as his wife like influenced him towards like, being an advocate for civil rights and equality and all of that, he saw some holes in what his dad had been believing. And in that, he also saw the dangers and the downside of ever being a true believer, in the true believer sense of the word, as far as like, you're all in, you don't question, everything that is said is automatically truth. Like, that's dangerous. And it does not work. Again, going back to this Aries North Node concept of like your philosophy about life, like, how do you want to play the game? What works and what doesn't work? You cannot bite me, Babo. I don't like. No. It's Babo. So the ruler of his Aries North Node is Mars, right? Mars being the ruler of Aries. So his Mars placement is direct. That's number one. So it's like full steam ahead on whatever it is that he's doing. So if the ruler of your North Node is Mars and your Mars is retrograde, that is another signal that there's a lot of contemplation meant to happen and not nearly as much action moving forward. And neither is right or wrong. Like, all of it fuels the good of the all of it in that very Aquarian, Piscean, universal perspective. Like, all of the individuals fuel the good of the all. All of them play their part in bringing about the highest good of the all. So it is really important that we don't compare the size of what we're doing. Again, that goes back to the heart-to-heart I had with Ananda recently, where it's like, what if nobody sees your grand mission? What if you don't go down in the history books for like what it was that you did, And that is more okay with some people than others. And it's really funny because I think in a lot of ways, like Warren Buffett couldn't care less about that kind of thing. He does have the 10th house energy. He does have the Saturn in the first energy. So like the concept of a legacy, I'm sure is not completely out of the question to him, but why he's doing it is definitely not for that. He is absolutely focused into, I love numbers. I love numbers. And I love one of the other things that he loves, like, which is really interesting with his Sun and Neptune pretty close in the early degrees of Virgo. He loves finding the mistakes and correcting them and then not making those mistakes again. That's like one of the things that he loves to do, is to correct misthinkings. So again, maybe that's supported as far as like the ruler of his Sun, the Sun being like the core of our identity. The ruler of his Sun is Mercury, Sun in Virgo. The ruler of Virgo is Mercury. His Mercury is in Libra. So it's in the same sign, same energy as his South Node, his Venus, his midheaven. So like, again, you're back onto supporting and really clarifying and being able to speak to this journey of becoming your individual self and doing things for the reasons of, I enjoy this. I really like this. I love numbers. I can't get enough of this. And that's why I did this. And then that got kind of dull, or I found and learned this other thing that kind of opened up this new thing. And so I went over here. And he's also a really incredible example of that, like, again, kind of circling back full circle here to instinctual versus impulsive. For the most part, 99.9% of his career, he has been incredibly instinctual, meaning he has this capacity to like just hold where he is and wait. Like his patience is just incredible. It like doesn't look Aryan at all, but I mean, there it is. Like that ability to be instinctual and really be a role model of that does not mean impulsive. That does not mean you're flying off the cuff and like being an asshole and, exploding when that's what you want to do. Like, that's not at all what it means. But I also want to say that emotional eruptions are something that Aries North Node is accepting in this life. And when he bought like the controlling share of Berkshire Hathaway, he was doing it because he was mad at the guys trying to cheat him out of the 8th, right? Those 12.5 cents per share. Like, fuck you. Like, you're not going to do that to me. Like, I'll just go buy the rest of the company and you'll be out of a job and I'll put somebody in there who has some integrity, because that's what I believe should happen. And so he's using his life force energy to affect things in the world that he wants to happen because he believes that that's how it should happen. And he says, and his business partner, who's like even more grounded and solid than he is, if that's even possible, both of them say that was a pretty silly way to behave. And what I want to say to him and to any other Aries North Node is learning to accept your emotional eruptions as serving the good of the all. Like in those moments when you are filled with energy and you're able to channel it however you channel it, like constructively in a way where you're really proud of, like that's great. And kudos, and learning to allow your full energy to come forward. Like you have to have outlets, like you have to find, where am I going to offload all of this energy that's rising inside of me? And that's where physical exercise, sexuality, like all of those outlets can be really helpful for that, like letting that Aries energy flow. But at the same time, like overcoming the shame of emotional eruptions and even seeing the benefit in them. Like, he says that he got mad at the injustice of this guy trying to like double cross him or whatever. That happened 5 days after his father passed away. And so he's like, I don't know how that affected me. That was just kind of the end of that. And then the guy was like, do you remember your last conversation with your father? And he's like, yes, and I don't want to talk about it. And that was the end of that. And so like, you don't really get a whole lot as far as like, yeah, how did it affect you? But I can only imagine where his dad was his loving parent, which I found really interesting. He's got a Mars in Cancer. So I think that's kind of interesting as far as like his dad being the one who was really loving and supportive with him. So his dad dies, and 5 days later, he gets mad about this guy double crossing him, and that's what he does. He buys the company, he outs the guy, he puts his own management in there. And that begins his pattern, his like real pattern of he buys these companies and he owns it and he puts managers he can trust, or he already trusts the managers, and then he just kind of like leaves it sit there. And he's got like all of these businesses in his portfolio. And that whole practice of doing that started out of this emotional eruption of him getting mad at the guy. And I also think it's so interesting that like the heart of his anger is injustice. Like, how dare you do business this way? Like, that's a gross way to do business. Like, I can't believe you would even treat someone that way. Like, you need to just get out of here. Let me put somebody in here who's got some principles, some morals, you know? And that's the thing about like the Libra South Node and the Aries North Node, and maybe we'll leave it with this, is like that Libra South Node and the lifetimes of, you know, exaggerating one's Libra energy, right? Meaning you are observing. You are not a player of the game. You are observing other people playing the game. And in order to get in the game and model a different way to play the game, right? Like, if you, basically what I see as an Aries North Node is that you are sick and fucking tired of being on those sidelines watching other people make the same mistakes over and over and over, and like, why don't they just play it this way? And you've been shouting that from the sidelines, and then there's people who are in the game telling you that you're in the cheap seats, dude. Like, why don't you get in the arena and get your ass kicked? And then tell me how I should be playing the game. Then tell me how easy it is to not make that mistake, or to, you know, not do this or not do that or whatever. Like, you're in the cheap seats, Libra South Node. And Libra South Node, in terms of like you coming in this lifetime with the North Node pointed towards Aries, it's like, I believe you gave up your seat in the arena to get in the arena and show us how it's done. You have an idea, you have a sense. And again, like, as far as where are you in your eternal evolution, right? Not all Aries North Nodes are going to create the same experience. Everybody's on their own spectrum with that. And like, if more indicators in your chart are pointing you back to the Libra South Node, perhaps you're here to really illustrate and unpack and discover, possibly through trial and error, the downsides and the limitations of that Libran shadow. And that's your contribution to the all, and that's beautiful. If that is your individual contribution, there's value and there's beauty in that. Like, that's possible. And if more indicators are pointing towards the Aries North Node side and like leaning into that direction, really stepping into that direction, then chances are, and especially with that 10th house South Node, so like if you're an Aries 4th house North Node, like, you're here to get on a world stage and be seen for how you play the game. Your philosophy of how you play the game will be studied for decades and centuries and millennia, potentially, like going down in the history books as far as the only person to ever do this, the first person to ever do this. Like, as an Aries North Node, I would love to hear how it feels to you to imagine that that is who you are. And again, like if your chart is more grounding in the Libra South Node and exploring those realms, or in the Aries, like wherever you are, you know, how does it feel to think about having that big of a self, that like that much attention and praise and just admiration of you, and the bridge to get there, right? Like I'm seeing that picture that Brene Brown shows in her Vulnerability TED Talk, the first one that she ever gave. It's like the picture of being like down in the dungeon under the arena and the stairs and the light from the arena, and like Aries North Node, you came in to be the warrior. You came in to face the fear, right? Like not necessarily to conquer the fear such that the fear doesn't exist, but to conquer the fear such that the fear is no longer driving your bus, such that the fear is on board, but no longer calling the shots. And this lifetime with Aries North Node, for any of you that have it natally, and Warren Buffett is a perfect example, is about really digging into what kind of a self did you come here to have? Like, we all signed up to hold power. That is how I understand, like, we claimed a body. We signed up to hold power. And then what do you do with it? What do you use it for? How do you use it to push different buttons in the world? You know, how do you use it to vote for what? You know, like with great power comes great influence. And especially when you're aligned with your power and you've got it all inside of you and you're trusting your own gut and you're directing it to like what really feels exactly true to you, like the impact, the influence that's possible is absolutely gigantic. And as a person, as an Aries North Node who came here to play the game, how is it that you want to play? You know, there's free will, there's freedom of choice. Every single person can play the game however they want, right? Like nobody else has to play it like you in order for your way to be valuable. And again, that's where like I think Warren Buffett is a great example of, I think his example is only going to get more valuable with time. Like there's something about Uranus being in the sign of his North Node that's like, yes, he is very much directed at finding his own individuality, and that true individuality is always ahead of its time. Always. And that like, that's part of the Aries North Node, is that probably one of the greatest challenges is that you have to be you before it's cool to be you. And the thing is, with Aries North Node, y'all are like trendsetters. You're like blazing these new trails of what's possible in human form. And you got to be you before it's cool to be you. And by the time it's cool to be you, the you is probably already over here on a new leading edge where nobody else is. So that Libra South Node really is programmed for the harmony amongst the collective, and the whole gist of the Aries North Node is breaking free of the noise of the collective so that you can hear your own truth, so that you can find what's true for you. How do you want to play the game? And then let the arc of time, let the chips fall where they may. You know, like time will tell. And the Libra South Node may have to endure being misunderstood or not being appreciated or being vilified or, you know, like really not getting social support. And that being kind of a theme and a trial of being on the leading edge of innovation and existence on this planet means that like there's really not anybody who can be like, yep, you're doing it right. And so again, like every single time you feel like, I wish there was somebody to just like tell me that, yes, this is the right course. Like every single time you feel a lack of support, it is a whole nother layer of digging even deeper into how do I be my own root? How does my own individuality source my knowingness and my resilience and my courage just because I can feel it? You know, like I've got no receipts, I've got no research, I've got no second opinion, I've got no like scientific second tested, theory. Like this is not backed up. This is just my individuality. This is just my intuition telling me what I think is true. And I'm going to push all my chips onto the table and take a huge risk on being who I really am. And one of the things that I think, like as we circle back on Aries North Nodes, there's, I think, a theme of courage and a theme of risk taking that, again, it goes back to this, like without social support, without that social safety net, when you mess it up, the mob is going to point and laugh and be like, see, we told you so. We told you shouldn't take that risk. And again, no support, but that's a time to like pull back into ourselves and find the courage to be ourselves, even when nobody else is supporting us in that journey. Nobody else has to support us in that journey. We have everything that we need already inside of ourselves when we get here. And tapping into that, connecting into that life force energy is the beauty, the beautiful beauty of this 18-month Aries North Node transit. So thank you so much for letting me share a bit about this Aries North Node individual. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, take a second to give the video a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, share this with whoever you think might enjoy it, subscribe to the channel if you're into North Node content. We will be circling around various different topics related to the North Node and leaning into our destiny, leaning into the soul level development that will get us to our destiny. The step by step practical application of these esoteric energies, that is my passion. I love it so much. I'm so glad that you're here. Until next time, I do hope that you'll take such good care of yourselves, and so will I.